At my family's Thanksgiving dinner, I discovered my husband's affair. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just smiled, then left silently. What happened next, no one saw coming. The Robinson Thanksgiving was the event of the year, at least in Atlanta. Our dining hall looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Gold chargers, crystal stemware, jazz humming under the laughter of 3 generations. The smell of rosemary turkey and truffle mac and cheese wrapped the room in warmth that felt rehearsed, like we'd all been cast to play Happy Family. I'd worn the gold satin dress my late father loved, the one that made candlelight dance off my skin. Beside me sat George M. Aguilera, my husband, polished as ever, cufflinks gleaming like he'd practiced sincerity in the mirror. Across the table, my brother Dreon performed his annual retelling of the year Dad accidentally set the smoker on fire. Everyone laughed in the same places. Some traditions survive because pretending is easier. George lifted his glass. "To forever," he said, tapping mine. His smile belonged to the cameras that weren't there. I returned it anyway. That's what a Robinson does, smile for the legacy. Then, my phone buzzed. A single photo filled the screen. No caption, no explanation. George, my George, his hands tangled in a blonde woman's hair, his mouth pressed to hers outside a midtown restaurant. The timestamp read 3:46 p.m. today, 5 miles from our estate. The room dimmed for a fraction of a second, like the chandeliers inhaled with me. My pulse skipped once, then steadied. My face stayed neutral. I looked at George. He was still laughing with Dreon, telling a joke about the Falcons and bad coaching. Sarah J., that was her name. I recognized the curve of her jaw even in the grainy photo. She worked with him, the one who always managed to stay late when he did. For half a breath, I wanted to throw the phone straight across the table. But legacy doesn't do scenes. Legacy plots in silence. I slid the phone under my napkin, nodded for Kiki, the lead server, to refill the glasses. "Perfect pour, thank you," I said evenly. Then I touched Dreon's shoulder. "Keep them laughing," I whispered. "I need some air." The side hallway was quiet except for the echo of my heels. I passed family portraits, my parents in Paris, Dreon and me at our high school graduations, my wedding photo. In that one, George's grin looked exactly the same as the man at my table, practiced. Outside, the November air carried a chill that bit just enough to feel cleansing. I could still hear the hum of dinner inside, muffled jazz and silverware clinking. A dynasty feasting on illusion. I wasn't angry. I was awake. Pulling out my phone, I studied the photo again. The timestamp blinked in mockery. I saved the image, forwarded it to my secure drive, then scrolled back through messages. Nothing incriminating. He'd gotten better at hiding. My father used to say, when someone gets too good at secrecy, assume the secret is already rotting. I exhaled, then texted Kiki. "Lock my study when dinner's over. Don't let Mr. Aguilera inside." She responded within seconds. "Understood, Mrs. Robinson." From the patio, I could see into the dining room, the shimmer of gold flatware, George clinking glasses, Dreon roaring at his own punchline. For a moment, memory tangled with the scene. Our first Thanksgiving together, Dad alive, teasing me about marrying a man who quoted quarterly earnings at the dinner table. "Be careful, sweetheart," he'd said. "Some men chase wealth because they have none of their own." Dad was gone now, but his foresight wasn't. His name still anchored every document in my life, the trust, the foundations, the contingency plans he built for storms he hoped I'd never see. And now I was standing in one. Inside, laughter swelled as the pumpkin pies arrived. I turned away, walked toward the circular drive, and felt the first honest calm I'd known in years. The choice had already made itself. Atlanta at midnight glows different when you're done pretending. City lights blurred through the windshield like melted gold as I passed Peachtree Street, hands steady on the wheel. My phone buzzed again, George texting heart emojis and a drunken, "Best dinner yet, babe." I let the screen fade to black. My father's voice threaded through memory. "Dignity is quieter than revenge, but it cuts deeper." I finally understood what he meant. At the red light outside Juggernaut Associates, I killed the engine. The firm's tower loomed like a monolith against the sky, Dad's legal fortress. He'd trusted attorney Matt Juggernaut more than anyone. When Dad passed, Matt promised he'd keep watch over the empire and the girl. Tonight, both required him. The lobby guard recognized me instantly. "Evening, Mrs. Robinson. Need me to call Mr. Juggernaut?" I nodded. "Tell him it's the file my father named for bad weather." Matt arrived minutes later, coat half-buttoned, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Fiona," he said carefully, "I assume it's begun." He led me through the quiet marble corridors to his office, where a steel cabinet waited. He unlocked it, slid out a folder sealed in wax. The label read, "In the event of betrayal, Dad's handwriting." Matt broke the seal and spread the contents across the desk: trust deeds, corporate share certificates, a detailed instruction letter. If George M. Aguilera breaches his vows by deceit or infidelity, activate the Juggernaut clause immediately, transfer all holdings to the Robinson Legacy Fund, spousal access terminated. My father had planned for this exact night before walking me down the aisle. We worked in silence except for the clicking of Matt's keyboard. He explained each move as if teaching strategy. Step 1. We shift every liquid account into your private foundation. His name will vanish from the banking grid by dawn. Step 2. The prenup clause. Tony anticipated infidelity nullification. I'll have that notarized within the hour. Step 3. We prepare the filing for divorce initiation grounds already established by the attached evidence. We'll timestamp it before he even realizes you've left the dinner table. I signed where he pointed. The pen didn't shake. Matt studied me for a long moment. "You're remarkably composed." "I learned from the best," I said. "My father didn't raise screamers, he raised strategists." "By 1 ampere. M." The last signature dried. Matt slid the folder back toward me. "By dawn, the money moves. By noon, the story moves." While we worked, George stumbled through his victory lap at home. He'd made another toast, Kiki told me later, about having it all. Drian noticed my empty chair but assumed I'd slipped away to check on the caterers. No one questioned the heiress who sometimes disappeared mid-party. I'd made that habit a shield years ago. Kiki kept the courses flowing, whispering to the staff not to disturb the study. She'd already secured my jewelry cases and personal drives inside. Loyalty is invisible until it's tested. At 10 amperes. M. I texted her one word, "Done." She replied with a heart emoji and, "Be safe, ma'am." Before leaving the firm, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking downtown. From this height, the city looked obedient. Every light flickered on schedule, every building silent. I realized that I'd spent years believing stability meant standing still beside someone. But real stability, Dad's kind, came from motion, pulling the right levers before the storm hit. Somewhere out there, George was probably snoring beside an untouched pillow, convinced tomorrow would look the same. He had no idea the ground beneath him was already changing titles. When I arrived home, the house slept. Only the exterior lights traced gold lines along the driveway. I walked through the foyer, down the corridor lined with family portraits, and placed a small cream envelope on the dining table, the same spot where George had toasted forever. Inside, a note. "You feasted on deception. Tomorrow you'll taste silence." Beside it, I set my wedding ring. It caught the reflection of the chandelier like a fallen star. Upstairs, I packed deliberately. Documents, laptop, one suitcase of clothes. In the mirror, I caught my own eyes, and finally recognized the woman Dad always described, someone who doesn't wait for rescue. For a brief second, the tears threatened. Then the phone vibrated again, George texting, "Where did you go? Everyone's asking for you." I typed, "Felt faint, needed rest, enjoy the night." Send, block, done. As I zipped the suitcase, my brother called. "You okay, sis?" "You vanished mid-toast." I smiled at the worry in his voice. "Just tired. Long day." He posed. "You sure?" George said. Don't believe anything George says tonight. That silence on the line carried 100 questions I wasn't ready to answer. "Trust me, Drian," I said softly. "By morning it'll make sense." He exhaled, reluctant but loyal. "All right, whatever this is, I'm with you." That was enough. The car engine purred to life. As I eased down the driveway, the mansion shrank in the rearview mirror, beautiful, hollow, expensive, the kind of place that photographs better than it feels. I thought of Sarah J., probably waiting for a message he wouldn't send. I thought of George's smirk when he believed he owned the Robinson legacy through me. And then I thought of my father's will, the clause that would rewrite every cent of that illusion by dawn. I whispered a thank you to him, for the foresight, for the warning I'd ignored, for the safety net I was now turning into a sword, by 4 amperes. Paperwork was filed, accounts rerouted, and my marriage legally suffocating on its own silence. I parked at a hotel downtown, not one of George's favorites, and booked a suite under my foundation's alias. Sleep came in shards, but peace arrived with it. At 6 amperes, my phone buzzed again. Matt's confirmation message. All transfers complete, clause activated. Congratulations, Mrs. Robinson. For the first time that night, I allowed myself a real smile. Sunlight bled through the curtains, washing the skyline in rose gold. I stood by the window with coffee in hand, watching the city wake beneath me. George would be stirring soon, checking his accounts, calling his bank, realizing the empire he bragged about had evaporated while he slept. But that was his morning. Mine was just beginning. I picked up my phone, dialed one final number. "Matt," I said when he answered, "let's finish it. Start the filings, and alert Dreon at noon. By the time George figures it out, I want every door closed." "Understood," he replied. "Operation Juggernaut moves at dawn." And as the line clicked off, I felt the weight lift, not of loss, but of inheritance fulfilled. My father had built an empire. Tonight, I learned how to defend it. Midnight in Atlanta has a way of pretending it's softer than it is. Streetlights blur the edges, windows glow like promises, and if you're not careful, you'll believe the city loves you back. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. It only mirrors what you bring to it. And tonight I wasn't bringing grief, I was bringing choices. I didn't drive home. Home was crystal and candlelight and a husband who could toast to forever with someone else's lips still on his. I slid behind the wheel, shut the door on the laughter, and followed the long spine of the driveway until the gate opened and swallowed me whole. If you've ever left a room quietly while your entire life kept eating dessert without you, let me break it down. Silence can sound like victory if you decide it does. The radio was off. I wanted to hear the city breathing. My phone vibrated with a text from George, 3 hearts, and a "best dinner yet, babe," like emoji could erase evidence. I let the screen dim back to black. Not tonight. Tonight wasn't about explaining, pleading, or proving. Tonight was about instructions my father left in ink, because he knew one day I might need a backbone made of paper. I turned onto Peachtree, and the glass buildings rose around me, all steel and apatite. My father used to say these towers were mirrors for men who didn't know who they were without seeing themselves 10 stories high. He didn't say it kindly. He didn't say most things kindly, but he was rarely wrong. Tony Robinson taught me 2 useful things about control. Never argue with people who are beneath the truth, and always keep a door only you can open. He called it dignity. He called it contingency. He called it Tuesday. The light turned red. I drummed my nails against the wheel and sent one text. "Lock my study. Do not let George in." Kiki responded in under a minute. "Understood, Mrs. Robinson," with a tiny key emoji because she knew me better than I sometimes admitted. If you've never had a woman like Kiki in your corner, I hope you do. Loyalty isn't loud. It can move a house. Juggernaut Associates sits on a corner like it owns the block. It might. The building isn't flashy, but it has that old money confidence, the kind that says we don't need to shout, our signatures do the shouting. I parked by the side entrance and walked under the awning where the concrete smells like rain even when it hasn't. The night guard stood up the second he saw me. "Evening, Mrs. Robinson," he said, voice pitched low as if the air should behave around us. "Do you want me to call Mr. Juggernaut?" I nodded, and he reached for the phone like he'd rehearsed it. If this feels clinical, me walking into a law firm instead of detonating a dining room, it's because you haven't learned this yet. Not everything you're owed arrives in applause. Some victories sign in blue ink while the world sleeps. The elevator hummed me to the 8th floor. Matt met me before the doors fully opened, coat half-buttoned, hair slightly out of place, eyes exactly where they always were, sharp, assessing, human. He looked at me as if I'd arrived on the night he'd been expecting, not hoping. "Fiona," he said, as if the name were a promise. "Is it time?" It was. You could feel it in the distance between us. That hush before the first chess piece slides. He led the way down a hall of framed settlements and men who thought they'd invented money. His office was a study in restraint. Dark wood, steel cabinet, floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city kneel. He didn't offer me water. He offered me a key. The cabinet clicked, the drawer stuttered once like it had a conscience, and then I was looking at a folder thick enough to end a chapter of my life. The wax seal was stamped with my father's initials, like a final, gentle hand on my shoulder, in the event of betrayal. You think those words land like a sledgehammer? They don't. They land like a stopwatch. A quiet, definite click, and then you start counting. How fast can I move? How much can I save? How much of me did I give away to a performance and call it love? Matt broke the seal and opened the file. Paper has a sound when you mean it. He spread the documents in a fan: trust deeds, equity assignments, account instructions, a letter with my father's handwriting I could spot across a room, no curves, all angles. A man who believed softness was something you earned. He didn't write long. He didn't need to. If this man breaks his vows by deceit or infidelity, activate the Juggernaut clause immediately. Transfer all holdings to the Robinson Legacy Fund. Spousal access terminated. You want to know the worst part? It felt like mercy. Matt talked me through the moves without looking away from me. Here's how we do this. 72 hours is generous. We can collapse it into 48 if you're ready. Ready? I'd been ready the moment my phone lit up under crystal light. He pointed. Step 1, liquid accounts. We shift everything into the foundation. His name evaporates from the banking grid before sunrise. No alerts go to him. We route everything through trustee channels already named by your father. Step 2, prenup. Your father insisted on the infidelity nullification clause. I have the notaries on call. We'll timestamp tonight. Step 3, filings. The petition can be drafted with exhibits referenced and submitted at opening of business. We'll cue it for the clerk's stamp so it posts before he understands the smoke is real fire. Step 4, protective orders if needed. Do you anticipate? I shook my head. George preferred to harm with charm. He didn't break things. He coaxed them into collapsing on their own. While Matt spoke, the room did that strange thing rooms do when they aren't rooms anymore, they become thresholds. Each sheet of paper offered a gate. Each signature promised a silence loud enough to replace the scene I chose not to make. Outside the window, Atlanta blinked like a polite audience. I thought of my father again. Of the last Thanksgiving with him alive, the way he'd laid a hand over mine and said, "If you ever need to walk away, walk forward, not out." Some men give you furniture, mine gave me exit. Signed my name once, twice where indicated, and then gave him the page. He checked, initialed as witness, and pressed the seal into the corner, the gold raised under his hand with a quiet authority that felt almost parental. He looked at me like a teacher who knows his student solved the problem her own way. "By dawn," he said, "each word even, each word good. The money moves." He set the second form in a different stack and slid a final document forward: press releases drafted in the event anyone tried to write a narrative I didn't consent to. By noon, he finished, the story moves. There it was, the line I hadn't realized I'd been walking toward all night. Dawn for the money, noon for the story, which is to say, first we survive, then we speak. I stood, my legs held. The city had shifted, the black outside the windows bluing at the edges, that thin band of color you get right before morning decides it's brave enough to show up. I tucked my father's unopened letter into my coat pocket. I reached for my bag and felt the weight of nothing, no ring, no explanation, no performance left in me. Free isn't a sunrise. It's a door you stop pretending is a wall. In the hallway, fluorescent lights hummed like old secrets. Matt walked me to the elevator and didn't say goodbye. He said, "We'll execute on schedule." It's a small distinction, but tonight was built on small distinctions. The doors slid open. I stepped in. As they began to close, he met my eyes. I think he was trying to measure whether I understood the scale of what we'd just done. I did. Another spoiler. The scale doesn't matter, the choice does. The elevator sank me back to the lobby where the guard straightened again, as if he'd been waiting on a verdict. I thanked him with a nod and stepped into the night air that smelled faintly of rain and fresh paper. The city felt cleaner than it had any right to. My phone lit again with George's name, then stopped. He'd try in the morning. Men like him always try in the morning. They believe daylight is on their side. Not this time. I slid into the driver's seat and watched my reflection settle in the rear-view, hair slightly looser, eyes quieter, mouth not quite smiling but not far from it either. If you've been waiting for the big dramatic line, here it is. I was not leaving the marriage. I was leaving the lie. That's different. That's permanent. I pressed start, the engine answered. Atlanta's first birds risked a note like they'd gotten my memo. I pulled into the street where headlights made small rivers and counted backward without meaning to 6 hours to dawn, 12 to noon, a lifetime to after. Somewhere in the building behind me, a printer spat copies and a seal cooled. Somewhere across town, a man who once kissed me in a room full of roses slept inside a life that did not belong to him. Somewhere between those 2 points, a woman me chose the quiet road home to herself. By dawn, the money moves. By noon, the story moves. Morning didn't creep in. It barged through the skyline like it owned the place. Atlanta glittered too bright for a city that had slept through a quiet coup. Spoiler alert, by the time the sun stretched across Peachtree, half of my husband's life already belonged to a different name, mine. I sat in the hotel armchair, barefoot, hair unpinned, watching the first emails populate on my tablet. Each subject line looked ordinary. Transaction complete. Confirmation notice. Routing change. But ordinary is how revolutions like to dress. 1 click, and the Robinson Trust, $600 million in investments, properties, and goodwill my father built from scratch, had shifted into the Robinson Legacy Fund. No drama, no confetti. Just a few digital signatures sealed in midnight blue. Every file confirmed the same phrase, spousal access revoked. You'd be surprised how silent freedom sounds when it's wired through banks instead of battle cries. Let me break it down. The Robinson Trust wasn't just money. It was leverage, safety, reputation, an empire with manners. And my father, being the paranoid genius he was, had designed it like a chessboard. Each asset came with a lock, and each lock recognized only one fingerprint, mine. Until last night, George had access through me, a courtesy my father allowed the way a lion lets a mouse share the shade. Now those doors read his credentials like a foreign language. He could knock all he wanted. Nothing would answer. I opened the spreadsheet Matt Juggernaut had sent at dawn. Line by line, assets ticked from joint to soul. The numbers glowed with that hypnotic green that makes accountants weep and enemies tremble. The transfer to the Legacy Fund was complete, all holdings under a non-profit shell dad established for moments requiring surgical discretion. I almost laughed. Even from the grave, Tony Robinson remained the best strategist in the room. Another ping, corporate cards frozen. The company email I drafted with Matt's team went out at 6.3 amperes. Effective immediately, all financial authorizations must be verified through the Robinson Legacy Fund. Temporary pause on discretionary accounts until further notice. Translation: every swipe George made this morning would be declined with the politeness of a guillotine. Across town, he was probably just waking up, stretching inside a delusion that the world still applauded him. I pictured him checking his phone, finding a dozen payment decline notifications, calling the bank, assuming it was a glitch. Spoiler alert, #2, it wasn't. Glitches are accidents. This was choreography. Matt's message arrived next. Prenup infidelity clause activated. Notarized at 5:45 amperes. Trustees have logged compliance. The line below carried my father's old motto as a digital signature. Integrity is a better weapon than rage. I traced the words with my finger, whispering a thank you he'd never hear. Around 7, the phone rang with a number I knew too well. George. I let it ring once, twice. On the third buzz I answered, because sometimes silence needs a human voice to echo off. Where'd you go last night? His tone was casual, but underneath it, a flicker of nerves. Felt faint, I said lightly. Told them I'd rest. He exhaled, relieved. You scared me for a second. Everyone kept asking. Tell everyone I'm fine, I murmured. Tell them dinner was unforgettable. He laughed, missing the irony completely. It really was. You looked incredible, Fi. Thank you, darling, I said, the way women in old movies say goodbye. Then I ended the call before he could build another lie. The quiet that followed hummed like satisfaction. If you've ever wanted to watch arrogance meet paperwork, stay tuned, because this was the part where the walls began to whisper. By 8, Juggernaut associates turned into a symphony of execution. Each associate operated like a surgeon, deliberate, sterile, merciless. Matt's assistant patched me into a secure conference call. Phase 2 is green, she said. Prenup enforcement filed with county clerk, pending ID confirmation, spousal assets under quarantine status until verification clears. Legalese for, George can't even sell his golf clubs without permission. Matt's voice came through next steady, clinical. We'll freeze the corporate cards tied to Aguilera Holdings. It's cleaner to let the system inform him. Meaning? I asked. Meaning the bank will call him first. They always call the man. It stings more that way. I smiled. My father would have liked you. He already did, Matt said. He told me you'd know when to push the button. Well? I said, sipping coffee that had gone cold. The button's pressed. Then enjoy the sunrise, Mrs. Robinson, he said. It's yours again. Meanwhile, across town, George's morning routine unspooled exactly as predicted. Kiki kept me updated through short texts, tiny dispatches from the kingdom I'd vacated. 8, 10 amperes. Mr. Aguilera in the kitchen complaining about coffee beans. He looks nervous. 8, 23 amperes. He asked if you're mad about something. Told him you're resting. 8, 41 amperes. Bank called. He went outside to take it. Face changed. Now pacing. 9, 2 amperes. He just threw his phone at the pool. I almost felt bad. Almost. But empathy is expensive, and I'd already paid my share. Let me pause here for anyone clutching their pearls. You think this is cruel? You think love deserves one more conversation? Spoiler alert, conversations don't cure entitlement. Sometimes the only language power understands is subtraction. By mid-morning, the internet began its daily gossip ritual. A local blog posted grainy photos from last night's dinner, me leaving the table, gold dress trailing behind. The caption, "Where did the Robinson heiress disappear to?" The comments were predictably vile. Speculation about health, drama, another rich people mood. No one guessed the truth, and that was the beauty of it. The quietest woman in the room had already rewritten the story before breakfast. Matt sent another update. Corporate share reassignment confirmed. Aguilera removed from Qualls Ventures board, effective immediately. He always confused the holding names, but I let it slide. The important part was clear. Every company that once used George's surname as decoration now belonged to the woman he underestimated. One signature, one night, and he was a guest in his own narrative. Around noon, fatigue hit the kind that comes after adrenaline and justice. Share a cup of coffee in your bloodstream. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and let the city hum through the window. The world kept turning, oblivious to the small revolution pulsing inside a suite at the Highland. That's when the hotel phone rang. The front desk, Mrs. Robinson, a courier just arrived. He says it's urgent. Of course it was. Every good act of control deserves its theatrical moment. I told them to send him up. The knock came 2 minutes later, a crisp rhythm, confident. The man in the doorway wore the neutral uniform of messengers who tasteful. Then you remember taste was never part of this story. At 8:06 a.m., my foundation inbox pinged with the first formal email. HR at George's company had flagged the clip fraternization, possible misuse of corporate accounts, and concerns regarding reputational risk. They invited him to provide context, which is corporate for, "We are preparing our paper trail." I forwarded the email to Juggernaut and muted the thread. There are times to narrate, and there are times to let a policy manual do the talking. This was a policy day. Another ping. A bank notification confirming the freeze extension on corporate cards. The phrasing was polite enough to hang in a museum. Effective immediately, discretionary privileges suspended pending verification. Translation: no dinners, no gifts, no quiet receipt that slips itself into the dark like a trained animal. If George wanted to impress anyone today, he would need cash and a miracle. He was short on both. Meanwhile, the clip made its second jump from local gossip to lifestyle accounts that love an aesthetic scandal. They did that thing where they desaturate the video and add jazz music like a film no one asked to be directed. Is this romance or wreckage? One influencer typed in cursive over a freeze frame of George's palm grazing Sarah's waist. Comments bloomed under it like mold. I knew it, didn't he just do a charity gala with his wife? This city eats loyalty for breakfast. Where's the heiress? Ah, that question. Where was the heiress? Missing, apparently, from her own Thanksgiving. The speculation came wrapped in concern like poison in candy. Hope she's okay, wrote a woman whose brand is compassion and collagen. But if men will be men, posted someone else, which is the sentence people use when they're too tired to deal with accountability. I closed the app before the part of me that collects grudges began building a museum. Kiki texted early, too early for anyone who wasn't holding the house together with bobby pins and willpower. She had lined up breakfast for the lingering guests, set out a tray of fruit, and the kind of pastries people reach for when they want to pretend sugar equals normal. Older cousins asking where you are, she wrote. Told them you weren't feeling well. Drian said he took you to see a friend, running interference. I pictured my brother in the foyer, arms folded, leaning into that easy charm he wears like denim. He can make a fire alarm sound like a lullaby when he wants to. He was likely doing it now, redirecting questions into stories, making the elders laugh until they forgot the point of their curiosity. A Robinson skill. Redirect the river, don't dam it. George surfaced by text around 9:20, a short blast of false calm. We need to talk, he wrote, as if talk were a currency I had left to offer. My phone lit up with his name as if it could still make demands. I let it sit on the table and vibrate until it realized it had no power here. Everything okay? He typed 3 minutes later, because men like him believe control can be confused if they just hairpin into kindness. He followed with a voice memo his tell whenever he's improvising feelings. I didn't listen. Words unspooled toward me and fell to the floor unheard, and if that isn't a metaphor for our marriage, then I don't know what is. The hotel TV, on mute, ran a news crawl about holiday traffic and a weather front as if none of this were extraordinary. That's the insult of a personal earthquake. The world keeps its schedule. I stood by the window and watched the freeway braid itself in ribbons, every driver confident in their destination. Somewhere along that asphalt, a man with my last name was beginning to realize he'd been living inside an inheritance he didn't earn. He'd call a banker, he'd blame a system, he'd promise a woman he didn't love protection he could not give. Care if you're sorry. A minute later, my phone lit one last time with his name. We need to talk, he wrote, as if words were an elevator that could carry him to a floor he'd never bothered to build. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, then moved to the forward icon. I sent the message to Juggernaut without a note. He replied with a single checkmark. Understood. And that's where I left it. The city hushed under its own glitter. The house reset to an innocence it hadn't had in years. The internet bored enough to wander off while inside a corporate server somewhere. A calendar appointment with my husband's name on it sat at 9 a.m., quiet as a trapdoor. Morning smelled like burnt coffee and panic. Not mine, his. Spoiler alert, when a man builds his identity out of money that isn't his, he doesn't notice the smoke until the whole thing's an inferno. George woke up in that sleek midtown condo he used to brag about modern art on the walls, a balcony overlooking the city, a kitchen that looked like it had never met grease. I imagine he started the day like he always did. Espresso, mirror check, quick scroll through emails to find proof he mattered. But what he found that morning wasn't affirmation, it was silence. The kind that follows after the orchestra leaves the stage. First came the email from HR reminder of the mandatory hearing Monday 9 a.m., then the bank notification, this one colder, temporary suspension of corporate accounts. Finally, a voicemail from an unknown number, the voice too formal to be friendly. Mr. Aguilera, this is a courtesy call regarding the inquiry into expense misuse. He would have stared at his reflection, still halfway believing mirrors could lie. By the time Drian knocked, George was pacing barefoot across the marble floor. Let me break it down. My brother doesn't knock twice. He doesn't need to. When Drian decides to speak, the room listens like it owes him money. He was the only person my father ever described as a blade that learned manners. When he stepped into George's condo, the place dropped 5 degrees. George opened the door with that half-laugh men use when they think they can charm away consequences. Well, this is a surprise, he said. Did Fiona send you to play messenger? Something like that, Drian replied, slipping inside. He wore a dark suit that made him look like the embodiment of composure. I'm here to deliver clarity. She thought you might appreciate that. George gestured toward the couch. If this is about money, tell her I'll fight for what's mine. I built part of that company. I have rights. Drian didn't sit. He dropped a slim leather folder on the glass coffee table, the sound deliberate. Half of what, exactly? He asked softly. George blinked. Half of everything, obviously. The properties, the trust, the stocks. I was her husband. You know how this works. Do I? Drian smiled without warmth. Because I've read the paperwork, have you? George's eyes flicked toward the folder. I don't need to. Fiona's reasonable. She won't drag this out. Drian opened the folder. Each page slid free like a blade. That's where you're wrong. She won't drag anything out because it's already over. He pulled out a document stamped with Juggernaut Associates' crest and placed it neatly between them. Your signature is nowhere on this. Tony made sure of that. George picked it up, scanned a few lines, frowning. What is this? The prenuptial addendum your father-in-law insisted on before the wedding, Drian said. The clause you pretended didn't exist because you assumed lawyers were just props at ceremonies. George's face flushed. She'd never enforce that. It's barbaric. Infidelity nullifies access to the estate, Drian read aloud. That's the line you signed under, the ink still holding. For a second, George looked like he might laugh, the reflex of someone who's used to being rescued by disbelief. You can't prove anything, he said, voice a little higher now. Pictures mean nothing. Gossip's not evidence. Drian leaned forward, elbows on knees, calm enough to make calm look dangerous. George, I'm going to save you the embarrassment of pretending this conversation is about denial. We have timestamps, receipts, phone logs, text messages, GPS coordinates, and the hotel staff willing to testify that you liked the corner suite because it had better lighting. You were never discreet. You were predictable. He reached into the folder again and pulled out another sheet, a copy of the bank statement showing charges from the Grand Hotel, room service for 2. See this? He said, tapping the paper. That's what betrayal costs at market rate. $847, champagne and roses. She paid for it technically since you used a joint card. Congratulations, you managed to make your own downfall tax deductible. George rose from the couch, hands on his hips, pacing. This is insane. She can't strip me of everything. There has to be a negotiation. Drian stood, slower, taller. There isn't. There's a correction. You're leaving with exactly what you brought into this marriage, a suit, an attitude, and some watch you probably financed. The color drained from George's face. You think you're scaring me? I'll take this to court. Drian cut him off with a slight lift of his hand. No, you won't, because if you do, we'll unseal more. The expense misuse at your office, the receipts for those dinners you claimed as client meetings, the fact that one of those dinners was Valentine's Day. George froze. Drian continued, voice smooth as glass. We'll also mention Sarah's pending suspension. HR has already confirmed they're investigating. Once they pull your emails, she'll lose her job completely, and you'll lose whatever dignity you've managed to lease. You wouldn't, George muttered, but the conviction was gone. Drian smiled faintly. Try me. He took a slow step forward, close enough that George could smell the aftershave my brother wore like punctuation. Tony built walls around his daughter for a reason. You thought they were decorative. They were load-bearing. You're standing outside them now. George dropped back onto the couch. staring at the floor like it might offer an escape clause. "I loved her," he said weakly, as if the word might still be currency. "No," Drian said, folding the folder shut. "You loved what she represented. You loved access, applause, reflection. But you never loved her, because if you had, you wouldn't have gambled her peace for validation." George rubbed his face, palms rough against stubble. "So what now? You gloat? You came here to watch me fall?" Drian considered it. "Not fall, understand. There's a difference." It came to her in fragments, text messages that stopped arriving, friends who needed space, coworkers who suddenly discovered their calendars were full. She sat on the edge of a twin bed in an apartment she couldn't afford and stared at the HR email for the 100th time, suspended pending review. She'd read it so often the words had lost shape. What remained was the subtext, "You've been erased politely." George had promised her protection, which is what liars call anesthesia. "I've got you," he'd said. "Don't worry, I'll fix it." But protection is a privilege of ownership, and he never owned anything. Not the money, not the company, not even the version of himself he sold her. When her rent notice arrived, the envelope looked like an eviction and a metaphor at the same time. She opened her phone and scrolled to Fiona's page. Photos from charity events, architecture of the estate in the background, smiles that now looked like warnings. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the message icon. What could she possibly say? Sorry for touching what wasn't mine? Sorry I believed him? Sorry you're a headline because I was careless? In the end, she settled for honesty's weakest cousin apology, disguised as confession. Sarah J. "Mrs. Robinson, I just wanted to say I didn't know. I thought he was divorced. He said things that weren't true. I know you have every reason to hate me, but I wanted you to hear it from me, not the press. I'm sorry." The message went unseen for an hour, 2, 3. Then came the reply, brief enough to sound eternal. "Assistant, Mrs. Robinson does not revisit the past." Sarah stared at the screen until her eyes blurred. She didn't cry. Guilt has stages. Disbelief is just the first costume. She turned the phone face down, whispered something that might have been prayer or profanity, and started packing. Across the city, the Robinson estate had found its rhythm again, polished quiet, the kind that hums under the surface like a well-kept engine. Fiona stood in the library with the morning light cutting lines across the carpet. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and endings. Kiki entered silently, as she always did, carrying 2 coffees and the day's mail. "No new press requests," she said. "The blogs moved on to some actor's divorce." "Tragedy," Fiona murmured. "Of course," Kiki said. They shared a smile that lasted longer than it needed to. It had been a week since the Thanksgiving dinner, but the distance between then and now felt biblical. Fiona set the coffee down, studying the woman who'd kept her house and dignity standing through the chaos. "You handled everything beautifully," Fiona said. "I didn't get a chance to thank you." Kiki waved a hand. "Just doing my job, ma'am." "That's what people say when they've done something heroic," Fiona replied. "Tell me, how did you know to lock the study before I texted you?" Kiki's face didn't flinch, but her eyes gave a flicker. "Your father used to say a good housekeeper notices weather before the forecast." It was the kind of answer that both explained and concealed. Fiona let it stand. "Then consider yourself promoted," she said. Kiki blinked. "Promoted to what?" "To the part of my life that doesn't get rebuilt without you." Something softened in Kiki's posture. "Thank you, ma'am." She hesitated at the door, then added, "For what it's worth, I think your father would be proud." When she left, Fiona sat back and traced the edge of the desk, the same one Tony Robinson had written letters on, the same surface that still carried faint grooves from his fountain pen. That man had built contingency into everything, including love. It made him difficult to adore but impossible not to respect. She reached for the small locked drawer he'd once forbidden her to open while he was alive. Inside were files labeled with cryptic precision, "Family Affairs Confidential." She'd ignored them for years, thinking they were legacy documents, but curiosity had a way of sounding like permission now. She opened one and found a list of names, attorneys, accountants, investigators. At the bottom, in her father's tight handwriting, a note, "Retained for routine family protection. Call in event of crisis." The investigator's card was still there, the name printed in gold, E. Howard Discreet Services. Fiona smiled faintly. She suddenly knew who had sent the photo on Thanksgiving night. She had assumed it was the PI her father had hired for routine security, someone who'd been monitoring the estate long before George learned how to spell inheritance. Except now, she wasn't so sure. Something about Kiki's eyes earlier, the quiet knowledge there lingered. But that was a mystery for another day. For now, there was rebuilding to do. Let me break it down. When you've spent years being defined by someone else's name, the first act of freedom isn't revenge, it's creation. Fiona had no intention of fading into philanthropy or scandal exile. She wanted motion, purpose that translated pain into structure. She called Juggernaut Associates that afternoon. "We're moving forward," she said. "Moving forward with what?" Matt asked, though his tone already knew. "My next life," she said, "and I need a company for it." He laughed softly. "You sound like your father." "I'm trying to sound like myself." Within 48 hours, Golden Hour Properties was born, a development firm dedicated to women-owned real estate ventures in Atlanta and Los Angeles. The name came from her father's favorite saying, "Every storm ends in a glow if you stand still long enough to see it." The glow wasn't metaphorical anymore, it was architectural. Her first board meeting was in a borrowed conference room overlooking Peachtree. 4 women sat around the table, an architect, a financial strategist, a community organizer, and Fiona herself. All had battle scars. All had something to prove. Fiona explained the mission in one clean sentence. "We build spaces for women who need somewhere to remember their worth." They didn't need to ask why she started it. Some stories explain themselves by existing. The early investors came quickly, people who understood the currency of redemption. Juggernaut helped structure the fund, funneling a portion of profits into scholarships and domestic recovery grants. "Pain," she told him during one of their meetings, "should never be wasted. It's capital. You just have to spend it right." He nodded. "And you will." For weeks, Fiona worked like a woman possessed. She toured potential sites, met with partners, negotiated contracts with the kind of poise that made men twice her age forget they were supposed to underestimate her. Reporters tried to reach her, of course, but her assistant's standard line, "Mrs. Robinson is focusing on new ventures," became its own sort of armor. Every deal she closed became a sentence in a new language. Power spoken softly but understood loudly. Across town, Sarah scrolled through real estate listings she couldn't afford, wondering how a single week could turn a life into a cautionary tale. The gossip sites had stopped using her name, which was almost worse. Infamy at least keeps you visible. Obscurity is where regret goes to rot. She'd started a new job, temporary, low pay, high humility, answering phones at a small firm. She told herself it was a step, not a punishment. But sometimes, in the mirror of her lunch break, she still saw George's reflection behind her. When his name trended again this time, linked to ethics hearing postponed pending legal counsel, she didn't click. Some ghosts deserve their silence. One evening, Fiona walked the grounds of the estate, now quiet under the first blush of spring. The magnolias were opening, unbothered by scandal. Kiki followed a few steps behind, checking the lanterns. "You don't have to hover," Fiona said. "Habit?" Kiki answered. "Old or new? Depends on who's asking." Fiona turned. "I am." Kiki hesitated. "Then new. You keep life interesting, ma'am." They both laughed, but Fiona's curiosity lingered. "Kiki, be honest, how long have you known?" "Known what?" "That George was—" "George." Kiki took a long breath, the kind people take before choosing truth over safety. "Let's just say the house has eyes, but I wasn't sure until that night. Someone had to protect you, even if you didn't ask." Fiona studied her. "Was it you who sent the photo?" Kiki met her gaze, unflinching. "Would it matter if I said yes?" "No," Fiona said softly. "It would matter if you said no." Kiki smiled faintly. "Then maybe it was me." They stood there, the weight of gratitude hanging in the air like perfume. Finally, Fiona said, "If it was, you saved me from a different kind of humiliation. I owe you." "You don't owe me anything, Mrs. Robinson," Kiki said, "but if you insist, maybe name a building after me someday." "Deal," Fiona said. The magnolias rustled agreement. By the time Golden Hour Properties broke ground on its first site, a transitional housing complex for women leaving abusive relationships, the story of the Thanksgiving heiress had turned into folklore. The press loved the symmetry. Betrayal turned benevolence. Scandal turned sanctuary. Fiona kept her statements minimal, her tone measured. When one reporter asked her what inspired the project, she simply said, "Experience." Investors poured in. The project gained momentum. And in the quiet hours between meetings, Fiona found herself thinking less about what she'd lost and more about the women who would walk through these doors one day, women who might never know her name but would live inside her defiance. Let me break it down. You don't move on by erasing history, you move on by editing it. Late one afternoon, while she reviewed blueprints in her study, her phone rang. The display read Juggernaut Associates. She smiled, assuming it was a progress update. "Matt," she greeted, "tell me you've found another loophole that makes me richer." His voice was steady but different, too careful. "Fiona, you need to listen." She straightened. "What is it?" "He's coming to the estate tomorrow." The air in the room thinned. "George?" "Yes. He called the office first, said he wanted to fix things. We denied the meeting, but I thought you should know." She leaned back in her chair, eyes drifting toward the window where twilight had started to pool like ink. "Fix things," she repeated, the phrase tasting like irony. "He sounded desperate," Matt said. "That's the dangerous kind." "I assume you'll handle security?" "Already did," he said. "But my advice be elsewhere. Let him talk to the walls." Fiona smiled faintly. "Poetic justice." "Justice," Matt said, "is rarely poetic. It's paperwork and patience." "Then I've already mastered it," she replied. After they hung up, Fiona sat in the growing dark, watching the reflection of her own face against the window glass. For the first time in months, she felt something that wasn't anger or resolve, it was curiosity. What does a man look like when the mirror finally tells the truth? Outside, the estate was still, waiting for morning. Somewhere in the city, George was rehearsing a speech he wouldn't get to deliver. Somewhere else, Sarah was deleting his number for the last time. And Fiona Robinson, the woman they both had underestimated, was planning not her defense, but her absence. Because sometimes loyalty isn't about standing your ground. Sometimes it's knowing exactly when to step away and let the ghosts find each other. Morning always exposes the liars first. The sky doesn't even try to be merciful, it just spills light where shadows once felt safe. At the Robinson estate, the dawn broke through the glass like a revelation. Every surface gleamed, the marble floors, the gold-framed portraits, the table where a man once raised a toast to forever. Spoiler alert, forever had a checkout time and it came early. George arrived right on schedule, dressed like contrition, had a dress code. Dark suit, open collar, hair combed just messy enough to look human. He rehearsed that look in mirrors. I used to watch him do it before charity galas. Now he practiced it for Mercy. He didn't come to apologize, men like him never really do. He came to negotiate with the ruins, hoping charm could build new walls over ashes. When he walked into the foyer, he expected perfume and forgiveness. Instead, he found attorney Matt Juggernaut and a court officer waiting by the staircase, like a scene too symmetrical to be coincidence. Matt stood with his usual precision, hands behind his back, expression carved from professionalism. The court officer carried a folder, thick with reality. "Mr. Aguilera," Juggernaut said, voice smooth as courtroom marble, "thank you for coming. Mrs. Robinson sends her regards." George blinked. "She's not here?" "She's precisely where she needs to be," Juggernaut replied. "We've been instructed to deliver a few documents in her stead." George hesitated, glancing around the grand foyer as if the house itself might explain what was happening. His gaze landed on the dining room. The doors were open. Light spilled across the long mahogany table where he had made his final toast to forever. He stepped forward slowly, the soles of his shoes whispering against the marble. And there it was. At the head of the table, where Fiona had sat that night, lay a single cream-colored envelope. Beside it, her wedding ring, the one he used to show off when he wanted to look faithful. Next to both, a note written in Fiona's clean, steady script. "You feasted on deception. Now you'll taste the silence you left behind." He stared at it, unreadable for a moment. Then his hand moved toward the envelope, trembling just slightly. Juggernaut spoke before he could open it. "Mr. Aguilera, for record-keeping, will confirm delivery." George turned toward him, voice brittle. "What is this? Some dramatic stunt?" Juggernaut tilted his head. "You could call it that, though legally, it's a divorce petition, an asset transfer notice, and a few other housekeeping items, all above board, I assure you." George tore open the envelope. Pages fluttered free like doves escaping captivity. The words glared back at him. Petition for dissolution of marriage, asset reallocation agreement, termination of access rights. He skimmed the lines, his face shifting between disbelief and dawning comprehension. "She can't do this," he whispered. "This house, this is mine." Juggernaut's eyebrows rose faintly. "Actually, no. It's owned by the Robinson Legacy Fund, a non-profit trust to which Mrs. Robinson is the sole living signatory. You've been residing here as a courtesy." George turned sharply to the court officer. "You hear this? This is insane." The officer opened the folder, confirming the signatures. "All filings processed through Fulton County this morning at 8:07 a.m., sir. Everything's in order." George stumbled back, hands pressed to his temples. "She blindsided me. You were warned," Juggernaut interrupted, his voice soft but absolute. "Repeatedly. You chose to hear what suited you." He closed the folder, eyes steady. "Our business here is concluded. A moving team will arrive by noon to collect your personal belongings. Anything beyond that is considered property of the Robinson estate." Outside, camera shutters cracked the air like gunfire. Paparazzi lined the driveway, their lenses hungry for collapse. Word had leaked, of course. Someone from the courthouse, maybe. Headlines were already forming. Atlanta heiress ends empire marriage. From toast to termination, Thanksgiving affair fallout. George caught sight of the flashes through the window and froze. For a man obsessed with optics, there's no worse punishment than exposure without control. His hand gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white. "Did she plan this?" he asked, voice thin, almost childlike. Juggernaut allowed himself the smallest smile. Meticulously, the court officer nodded toward the door. "We'll see ourselves out, sir." George didn't answer. He stood there, the sound of camera shutters echoing through the hall like applause at the wrong kind of play. He looked down at the table one last time. The ring glimmered in the morning light, simple, precise, final. He reached out to touch it, then stopped. Maybe he realized it didn't belong to him anymore. Maybe he realized it never had. Somewhere across the city, Fiona Robinson wasn't watching any of it. She sat in a glass conference room, surrounded by the hum of a different kind of power laptops opening, contracts being signed, women shaking hands like they'd just rewritten their own futures. Golden Hour Properties had its first investor presentation that morning. The timing wasn't coincidence, it was choreography. As George's illusions crumbled, Fiona's vision solidified. The contrast was poetic, but not accidental. "Ladies," she said, standing at the head of the table, "I won't waste your time with speeches. You know why we're here. We're building more than real estate, we're building stories. Ones that start with pain and end with ownership." The women around her nodded. Architects, financiers, dreamers. Every one of them had lost something once and decided to rebuild instead of retreat. Her phone buzzed on the table, screen lighting up with the headline, "Courtrooms have their own weather. The air is cooler, the light flatter, the space designed to make truth feel heavier than sound." Spoiler alert, it works. By the time we took our seats, Juggernaut arranging his files like scalpels, George posted beside his attorney like a man hoping proximity equals power. The room had already chosen a temperature. It wasn't warm. Dates first. The judge liked a timeline, not a tragedy. Juggernaut stood and drew one with the calm of a surgeon marking an incision. November 24th, he began Thanksgiving dinner. At 19:58 hours, Mrs. Robinson receives a time-stamped photograph of Mr. Aguilera and Miss J. outside Midtown Brasserie. He didn't point dramatically. He let the document camera project the image to the overhead screen, grayscale, clinical. A kiss turned into a fact. "We submit Exhibit A, metadata verification." He flicked to the next slide. Following morning, 0800 hours, Robinson Legacy Fund transfer confirmation. Exhibit B. Then the receipts, $847, champagne and roses, a credit card ending in the numbers that made my stomach clench once, months ago, before I learned to breathe through evidence. We ask the court to notice Exhibit C, a 3-month pattern of Tuesday hotel stays room service for 2 paid from joint accounts. Finally, the policy. Exhibit D, Miss J's employer policies on fraternization and expense use, signed and acknowledged by Mr. Pointisezere, end of quote. 9. Aguilera. Every line sat there in black and white as if truth were a mathematical proof we'd all been pretending didn't exist. George's counsel tan suit, polished hair, the kind of smile that looks least, rose for the defense. Your Honor, what we have here is a domestic misunderstanding, being weaponized through corporate bureaucracy. The opposing party is attempting to leverage wealth structures as cudgels in a dissolution. We dispute the characterization of these dinners as affair expenses, and we note that Exhibit A, the photograph, is unaccompanied by context. He spread his hands like context to new beginnings, he said, smiling around the table, and to knowing when to leave quietly. Everyone echoed the toast, glasses clinking like punctuation marks on a chapter that had ended well. Fiona smiled. This time it wasn't a mask. It was something real, something earned. She looked around the room and saw peace where chaos once lived. The same walls that had witnessed betrayal now held laughter again. The same table where a man once feasted on deception was now set for people who fed each other truth. Then, a sound soft, almost uncertain. The doorbell. Every conversation paused. Kiki, always composed, stepped toward the entryway, but Fiona stopped her with a glance. "It's all right," she said. "I'll get it." She crossed the foyer slowly, heels whispering against the marble. The glow from the chandeliers stretched her shadow long across the floor. She opened the door, and there he was. George. Not the man who once strutted through boardrooms and photo ops, not the man who toasted to forever with champagne he didn't pay for. This George was smaller shoulders sunken, suit wrinkled, eyes dull with sleeplessness. The arrogance had drained out of him, leaving behind something almost unfamiliar. He held a letter in his hand, trembling slightly. I lost everything," he said, voice catching. "The job, the condo, even Sarah. She left. I don't blame her. I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry." Fiona studied him for a long, quiet moment, not out of cruelty but because silence deserved its due. He waited for rage, maybe forgiveness, maybe some version of the woman he could still manipulate. But what he got instead was truth soft, unwavering. "Then we both learned something," she said finally. "Silence isn't weakness, it's control." He blinked, as if trying to translate the words. Before he could respond, she stepped back, letting the cold night air breathe between them. Then, with calm precision, she closed the door. The latch clicked not with anger but with finality. She stood there for a moment, her reflection faint in the glass panel, and whispered to herself, "Goodbye, George." Back in the dining room, the conversation had resumed without her, laughter rising from the table like a chorus of resilience. Kiki glanced at her from across the room, reading her face the way only loyal women can. Fiona nodded once, wordlessly assuring her, "It's done." Later, after the guests had left and the candles had burned down to gentle stubs, Fiona found Kiki in the study, tidying up papers. The firelight painted her face in soft amber. "You know," Fiona said, leaning against the doorframe, "I've been thinking about something." Kiki looked up. "What's that, ma'am?" "The photo. The one that started it all. The one that arrived on my phone that night. I always assumed it came from my father's investigator." Kiki froze for just a second, then smiled faintly. "Would it change anything if it didn't?" "Maybe not," Fiona said, stepping closer, "but it would mean someone cared enough to make sure I didn't walk into humiliation blind." Kiki hesitated, then exhaled. "It was me. I saw him. Weeks before, I wanted to tell you, but I figured you needed proof, not warnings." Fiona's eyes softened. "So you saved me before I even knew I needed saving." Kiki looked down. "I just didn't want you to be the last to know." Fiona walked around the desk, placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did more than that, Kiki. You changed the course of my life." She reached for a folder resting nearby and opened it, sliding a single document across the desk. Kiki frowned. "What's this?" "Your new title," Fiona said, "executive assistant and operations partner. And before you argue, there's also a 10% equity stake in the new Golden Hour Fund." Kiki's eyes widened. "Ma'am, Don't ma'am me," Fiona interrupted gently. "You earned it. Loyalty deserves legacy." For a moment, the older woman couldn't speak. She covered her mouth, blinking away tears she hadn't planned to show. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay," Fiona said. Kiki nodded. "Always." They shared a quiet moment, the kind of silence that feels sacred, not empty. Later that night, Fiona stepped out onto the balcony. Atlanta spread beneath her, a field of golden lights blinking like quiet applause. The city that once whispered about her was now humming her name in respect. The wind lifted her hair as she looked toward the horizon, toward everything she had rebuilt with patience, precision, and grace. Somewhere behind her, the house settled into stillness. The ghosts had left. The walls, at last, were hers. She whispered to the night, "Some inherit fortunes, the wise inherit themselves." The city lights flickered as if answering back. And just like that, Fiona Robinson's story came full circle, not in fireworks, but in peace, the kind that comes when you've given up revenge and replaced it with purpose. Now, before you go, let's talk about you. If you've followed Fiona through every twist and betrayal, if you've watched her reclaim her power with nothing but silence and strategy, then this is your moment to act. Don't just sit there in the dark like George, waiting for someone else to tell your story. Hit subscribe right now, because every time you do, you're saying yes to more stories about strength, truth, and the quiet kind of power that never needs to scream. And if you're one of those people who still won't subscribe, I've got a question for you. Why not? Tell me in the comments. Seriously, what's holding you back? Afraid to face your own reflection? Or maybe you just like watching from the sidelines while other people learn their lessons. Go ahead, tell me. Let's talk about it. But for the rest of you, those who stayed, those who felt something, thank you. You're part of this story now. And before you scroll away, there are 2 stories waiting for you right on the screen. Trust me, you'll want to click them. One is about a wife who begged the robbers to hide her from her husband until they found what was in his safe. The other, a driver who handed a husband a letter that changed his life forever. Click on them right now. Don't wait, because in this world, every story is a test, and silence, as Fiona proved, is the loudest answer of all.